At 55, I thought I'd finally done it. Vice president of a major bank, a house with a lake view, and a family I believed would be proud of me. I skipped countless Thanksgivings for board meetings, convinced that one day they'd understand. This year, I turned down the biggest promotion of my career just to be there. I walked through the door expecting smiles, maybe even applause. Instead, I saw a table perfectly set, every chair filled, except mine. The space where I used to sit was gone, replaced by someone else's. My son looked at me, his voice steady but sharp. "We didn't think you'd actually come." The words hit harder than any corporate failure. That was the moment I realized I hadn't just missed dinners. I'd missed my life. I had built a future no one wanted to share with me. But what happened next forced me to fight harder for my family than I ever fought for my career. I grew up in a small town in Ohio where winters were long, paychecks were short, and dreams were something you tucked away so you wouldn't be disappointed when they never came true. My father worked double shifts at a steel plant. My mother took in laundry, and I spent my teenage years promising myself I'd never live like that. At 55, I could say I'd kept that promise. Vice president at a major bank, tailored suits, a house on the lake. I told myself every sacrifice was for Linda and the kids. Linda was the girl I married when we were both young and broke, certain that love was enough to carry us anywhere. Mark came along first, then Emily, and every time I looked at them, I swore they'd never feel the same strain I saw in my parents' faces. For years, they believed me. When I stayed late at the office, Linda would tell the kids, "Your dad's working hard so we can have a better future." When I missed a weekend, I'd promise we'd make it up next time, and in those early years, they were patient. Then came the international project. It was supposed to be the crowning jewel of my career, a multi-country banking integration that would put my name in front of the board in ways I'd only dreamed, but it meant months of travel. Linda hesitated when I told her. "That's a lot of time away," she said carefully. I remember smiling, trying to keep it light. "It's just one big push. When this is done, everything will be easier." That one big push stretched into 2 years. I became a man who passed through airports more than his own front door. I sent postcards, brought gifts from every country I visited. I thought that was enough to remind them I was thinking of them. Birthdays came and went. I missed Mark's final college baseball game because I was in Zurich. I missed Emily's senior recital because I was in Tokyo on a call that ran hours past the performance. Linda didn't yell. That was somehow worse. Her texts became shorter, her voice on the phone more neutral. The first crack I really felt came the summer after my second year on the project. It was Linda's birthday. I'd sent flowers from Geneva with a card I dictated between meetings. She sent me back a single picture. The three of them at a restaurant I'd never been to, smiling. I wasn't in the picture. I wasn't even tagged. At first, I thought it was just an oversight, but when I scrolled through her social media later that night in my hotel room, I saw months of family outings, beach days, holidays, even Sunday dinners, with no sign of me. I was a ghost in my own family's life, the kind that still paid the bills, but never appeared in the photographs. When I got home briefly that fall, Mark was polite but distracted. Emily gave me a quick hug before retreating to her room. Linda met me with a smile that felt practiced. I told myself it was just an adjustment period, that once the project wrapped, we'd go back to normal. "David," Linda said one evening as we sat on the porch, "do you even know what normal is anymore? Because the kids and I have been living one, just without you." I laughed it off. I thought she was just tired. "Once this is over, we'll take that trip to Italy we've always talked about," I promised. She nodded but didn't look convinced. And then came the picture. It was Thanksgiving that year, one of the rare times I wasn't overseas. I was stuck at the office instead, prepping for the final phase of the integration. A colleague sent me a link to Linda's post. The table set for Thanksgiving dinner, Mark carving the turkey, Emily pouring drinks. My chair, always at the end of the table, wasn't there. The caption read, "Another wonderful Thanksgiving together." Together. Without me. I stared at the photo for a long time. I told myself it was just furniture rearrangement, nothing more. But deep down, I knew it was symbolic. My absence wasn't just tolerated anymore. It was expected. Still, I clung to the idea that once this project was over, once I could walk away with my promotion in hand, everything would snap back into place. I didn't realize it yet. But life doesn't freeze for you to catch up. It keeps moving, with or without you. By the time I realized my chair at Thanksgiving was more than just a piece of missing furniture, the walls in my own home had shifted. They weren't built of wood or drywall, but of silence. Linda had started attending more community events, charity drives, neighborhood meetings, local fundraisers. She used to ask me to come along. Now she didn't bother. I'd see pictures online of her at these gatherings, smiling naturally in a way I hadn't seen in years. She wasn't unhappy. She just wasn't waiting for me anymore. Mark and Emily were the same. I'd come home from a trip and find them laughing over something in the kitchen, only for the laughter to fade the moment I stepped inside. They had inside jokes I didn't understand, references to movies they'd watched together, trips they'd taken without me. It's not that they were cruel. It's that they'd learned to live without expecting me. One night, over drinks with an old friend, I got my first real taste of just how far I'd drifted. "I saw Linda at the charity gala last weekend," he said casually. "She looked great. That guy she was with, friend of the family." I froze. "What guy?" My friend hesitated. "Tall guy, gray hair, seemed friendly. They were talking a lot." I brushed it off, pretending it didn't bother me. But when I got home that night, I couldn't shake the image of Linda smiling beside someone else. I didn't accuse her. I didn't have the right. But it lodged in my mind like a splinter. The more I tried to force my way back into family life, the more I realized I didn't know how. I'd ask about their weeks, and they'd answer politely but briefly. Linda would share updates about Emily's college projects or Mark's job hunt, but her voice didn't carry the warmth it used to. One evening, as we cleaned up after dinner, Linda finally said it plainly. "David, the kids and we don't have room for empty promises anymore. They've heard you say next time their entire lives. I've heard it too. There's no more room for it." Her words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. That night, I lay awake thinking about what she'd said. For years, I'd told myself I was working for them, but maybe I'd been working for me, chasing status, recognition, the thrill of winning in the corporate world. Then came the promise. I told Linda and the kids that I'd be home for Thanksgiving this year. No excuses, no last-minute trips. I'd be there to set the table, to carve the turkey, to make it right. For the first time in years, they seemed cautiously hopeful. Emily even texted me a recipe for her favorite pie, asking if I could help make it this year. I saved the message like it was a lifeline. And then, just a week before Thanksgiving, the call came. It was the CEO himself. "David, The board's been watching your work on the integration. We're opening a new C-level position, Chief Strategy Officer, and we think you're the man for it." I felt the old rush of adrenaline. This was everything I'd worked for. All the late nights, the flights, the missed dinners, it all pointed to this moment. But there was a catch. "There's a summit in Singapore the week of Thanksgiving," he continued. "We'd need you there to present to the international partners. It's high stakes. You'd be representing the future of the company." For a long moment, I didn't say anything. In the silence, I could almost hear Linda's voice. "We don't have room for empty promises anymore." I took a deep breath. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't make the summit." There was a pause on the other end. "David, are you sure? Opportunities like this don't come twice." "I'm sure," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I have something more important to do." When I hung up, I sat in my office staring at the phone. It felt like I'd just turned down the pinnacle of my career. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I'd lost. I felt like I'd chosen something worth keeping. I didn't tell Linda about the offer. I didn't want it to sound like I expected a medal. All I wanted was to walk into that house on Thanksgiving and see my chair waiting for me. Thanksgiving morning felt colder than usual, though the weather was mild for late November. I pulled into the driveway a half hour earlier than I'd told Linda I'd arrive. The trunk loaded with pies from Emily's favorite bakery and a bottle of wine I'd been saving for years. I wanted to make a point. No, I needed to make a point. I was here. I was early. I was ready to make it right. I walked up the front steps, each creak of the wood carrying a strange mix of hope and fear. The front door was already open, a swirl of voices and laughter spilling into the crisp air. For a moment, I imagined walking in to smiles, maybe even the hint of forgiveness. Instead, I stepped into a scene I couldn't have prepared for. The dining table was perfectly set, every plate and glass in its place. But the chair where I'd sat for years, the end of the table next to Linda, was gone. In its place sat a tall, broad-shouldered man with graying hair. His easy laugh filled the room in a way I hadn't in a long time. Linda looked up, surprised. "David, you're early." Before I could respond, Mark's voice cut through, calm but sharp. "We didn't think you'd actually come." The words landed like a physical blow. My eyes went from Mark to Emily, then back to the stranger at the table. "And this is?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. Linda hesitated, then gestured. "This is John. He's been a great help while you've been away." Away. The word stung. I forced a polite nod toward John, who stood to shake my hand. "Pleasure to meet you," he said, his tone warm, as if he wasn't aware of the storm brewing behind my forced smile. Dinner began awkwardly. Conversations bubbled around me, but I wasn't a part of them. Emily and Mark updated Linda about work and school, sprinkling in inside jokes I didn't understand. John chimed in occasionally, telling a story about a community event or fixing something at the house. Every time his name came up, I felt the gap between me and my family widen. The turkey was carved, plates passed around, and still I felt like a guest at someone else's table. At one point, I leaned toward Linda. "So, John's been around a lot?" She kept her eyes on her plate. "David, there were things that needed to be handled while you were gone. He helped. That's all." I wanted to believe her. I also wanted to ask why it had to be him, why my seat at the table had been filled. But before I could, Emily put down her fork, her hands trembling slightly. "Dad," she said softly, "do you remember last spring? I emailed you about something important. I searched my memory, but nothing came. I get a lot of emails, sweetheart. Remind me what it was about. Her voice cracked. It was about me. I was falling apart. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I asked if you could call me just for a few minutes. You didn't answer. You didn't even reply. The room went silent. Emily's eyes were red now. John was the one who came over. He sat with me until I stopped shaking. He drove me to see someone who could help. He was there. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. All I could think about was the unread email buried somewhere in the thousands I'd prioritized over my daughter. Mark's voice cut in, quieter this time, but no less sharp. We stopped expecting you to show up, Dad. Not because we wanted to, but because it hurt less than hoping. The turkey on my plate went cold. I felt an ache in my chest that had nothing to do with the food. Dinner dragged on, each bite heavy, every word a reminder of how far I'd fallen from the center of this family. I caught John glancing at me now and then, not smug, not pitying, just aware. When dessert was served, I couldn't eat. I stood up slowly, the scrape of the chair against the floor louder than I meant it to be. I need some air, I said, stepping out onto the porch. The cold hit me, sharp and sobering. Inside, I could still hear the low hum of conversation. My family's life went on, with or without me. For the first time, I saw it clearly. I wasn't just a man who'd been absent. I was a man who'd been replaced, emotionally, physically, in ways I never imagined. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure if I could get that seat back. The Monday after Thanksgiving, I walked into my office at the bank and stared at the framed awards on my wall. For years, these plaques and certificates had been my trophies, proof that the sacrifices were worth it. Now, all I saw was the cost, the empty chair at Thanksgiving, Emily's trembling voice, Mark's steady but disappointed gaze. I asked my assistant to clear my schedule. Then I requested a meeting with the CEO. He was surprised to see me in his office so soon after declining the promotion trip to Singapore. David, he began, about that summit. We can still make arrangements if you've changed your mind. The board's still impressed. I'm not here to talk about Singapore, I said. My voice felt steadier than I expected. I'm here to resign. He stared at me for a long moment. Resign? David, this is a terrible time to walk away. You're at the peak of your career. I'm also at the edge of losing my family, I replied. And if I don't step back now, there won't be anything left to save. There was a pause. He leaned back, studying me like he didn't recognize the man sitting in front of him. You know this will close doors. The industry doesn't forget decisions like this. I'm counting on that, I said. I don't want to be tempted back. By the end of the day, my office was empty. I drove home with my car full of boxes and my mind strangely clear. For the first time in decades, there were no conference calls waiting for me, no red-eye flights on the calendar. I was determined to make it count. The next weeks, I showed up. To everything. I was there when Emily had her choir practice, when Mark worked on his truck in the driveway. I helped Linda with dinner, even when she seemed skeptical of my sudden enthusiasm. I didn't just want to appear, I wanted to be present. One evening, while helping Mark replace a set of brake pads, I tried to explain. I left my job, Mark. I wanted you and your sister to see I'm serious about this. He looked at me for a long moment, his hands still on the wrench. Dad, nobody asked you to quit your job to prove something. We just wanted you to actually be here. If you're doing this as some kind of fast-track redemption, you're going to fail. Because it doesn't work like that. His words stung, not because they were unkind, but because they were true. I realized then that showing up wasn't enough. Consistency was the only currency that mattered now. But consistency came with its own challenges. Without my salary, the financial strain became obvious quickly. I had savings, but the absence of my income meant cutting back on things we'd taken for granted. Vacations were postponed. Bills became a bigger conversation. I could see Linda calculating the changes quietly, though she never complained. And then there was the social shift. My phone, once buzzing with calls from colleagues, was quieter now. Invitations to corporate events dried up. People I'd considered friends seemed suddenly distant, as if my professional title had been the glue holding our connection together. One Friday evening, Linda and I were in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner. She was quiet, unusually so. Finally, she set down her dish towel and turned to me. "David, there's something I haven't told you." My chest tightened. "What is it?" She took a deep breath. "A month before Thanksgiving, I filed divorce papers. I didn't send them in. I wanted to see if you were actually going to change, or if this was another one of your promises." I felt the air leave the room. "Linda." She shook her head. "I didn't want to blindside you, but I needed you to know how close I came to walking away. And I'm not saying I've changed my mind. Not yet. I'm watching. The kids are watching. This isn't about one holiday or a few dinners. It's about whether this is real. For good." Her words were heavy, but beneath them I heard something I hadn't in years. Possibility. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a door, cracked open, just enough for me to step through if I could keep proving myself. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. I'd thought quitting my job would be the grand gesture that turned everything around. But it was only the beginning. Linda was right. This wasn't about a single gamble. It was about a sustained change, day after day, with no guarantee of a reward. And for the first time in my life, I realized I was willing to do the work without knowing if it would pay off. The weeks after Linda's confession felt fragile, like I was moving across a sheet of thin ice that could crack at any moment. Every step counted. Every word, every action carried more weight than I'd ever felt in a boardroom. I started small. Dinner became a ritual. Not just eating together, but being present. I asked questions, not the polite, surface-level ones, but the kind that required me to listen. Emily lit up when she talked about her music courses, her professors, her performances. Mark spoke about work, his frustrations with management, his plans to maybe start his own business one day. The more I listened, the more I realized how much I'd missed. Not just events, but details. I hadn't known Emily hated her sophomore roommate. I hadn't known Mark had nearly quit his job last year. I hadn't known these things because I hadn't been there to hear them. One Saturday afternoon, I found Mark in the driveway, leaning over the hood of his old truck. I offered to help. At first, he hesitated, but eventually handed me a wrench. We worked in near silence, the smell of oil and metal filling the cold air. It wasn't comfortable yet, but it was steady. By the time we tightened the last bolt, there was a sense of unspoken progress. Then came Emily's test. It was a Wednesday evening when she approached me after dinner. "Dad," she began, her tone careful, "I have a recital coming up next weekend. I'd like you to come." I smiled, maybe too quickly. I wouldn't miss it. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Don't come if you're going to be late. You remember last time." Last time. The senior recital I missed because of a conference call in Tokyo. Her voice wasn't angry now. It was cautious, protective of herself. "I'll be there early," I promised. The week leading up to the recital felt like a countdown clock. I built my schedule around it, making sure there was nothing, absolutely nothing, that could keep me from walking into that auditorium on time. The day of the performance, I arrived 30 minutes early. I sat in the second row, the program folded neatly in my lap. Emily appeared on stage, her eyes scanning the crowd. When she saw me, I gave a small wave. She didn't smile right away, but there was a flicker of something, recognition, maybe even relief. Then, just as the lights dimmed, an announcement was made. Technical issues. The recital would be delayed an hour. I braced myself for frustration, but Emily walked over to the edge of the stage, motioning for me to join her backstage. We found a quiet spot in the green room. "I guess we have time," she said, settling into a chair. It was the first time in years we'd been alone without the tension of missed events or broken promises hanging in the air. We talked, really talked. She told me about her struggles in her music program, the pressure she felt, the moments she almost walked away. I told her about the nights in hotel rooms when I'd scroll through pictures of the family, convincing myself I was doing the right thing. At one point, she looked at me, her eyes steady. "You know, I thought you'd never actually change. I thought you'd keep promising, and I'd keep getting disappointed." "I thought the same," I admitted quietly. "That I'd always have one more project, one more promotion. I was wrong. I'm sorry I realized it so late." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she reached out, squeezing my hand. "You're here now. That's what matters." When the recital finally began, I watched her play with a focus I'd never given anything outside my career. It wasn't just pride. It was gratitude for a second chance. Back at home, Linda noticed. She didn't say much at first, but I could see the shift. The tension in her shoulders softened. Her voice lost some of the guarded edge it had carried for months. One night, as we cleaned up after dinner, she spoke. "David, I think I can withdraw the papers." I froze. "You mean?" "I'm not saying everything's fixed, but I see you trying. I see you showing up. That's more than I've seen in a long time." It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was something just as valuable. Hope. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. A week later, Mark and I were in the garage. He was quieter than usual, focused on a stubborn part of the engine. Out of nowhere, he said, "You know, I didn't think I'd ever forgive you." I looked at him, unsure if I should respond. He continued, "For years, I told myself you'd never change, that you'd keep chasing work and we'd keep being an afterthought. But seeing you now, week after week, I don't know. It's different. I don't think I'm ready to say everything's okay, but I respect what you're doing." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was the first step toward it. And for me, that was enough. Healing wasn't a dramatic moment. It was a slow, deliberate process, built one dinner, one conversation, one repaired brake pad at a time. And for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just fighting for my family. I was becoming part of it again. A year can change a life if you live it differently. By the next Thanksgiving, the house looked almost exactly the same as it had the year before, except for one thing. At the end of the table, next to Linda, my chair was back. It wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a quiet declaration that I belonged there again. Linda had set the table with her usual care, Emily was arranging her pie on the counter, and Mark was carving the turkey. The air felt lighter this year, like the unspoken tension that had hovered over us for so long, had finally begun to dissipate. When everyone was seated, I cleared my throat. Before we start, I want to say something. All eyes turned toward me. I rested a hand on the back of my chair. Last year, this seat wasn't here. Not because the house was too crowded, but because I wasn't really part of this family anymore. I'd spent years telling myself I was working for all of you, when really, I was working for myself. This chair reminded me what I'd lost. I looked at each of them. Linda, Emily, Mark. This year, I'm grateful for more than just having this chair back. I'm grateful that you gave me the chance to earn it. That you didn't give up on me completely, even when I gave you every reason to. There was a quiet moment, broken only by the sound of the front door opening. I turned, and there he was, John. Linda stood, a smile on her face. I invited John to join us, she explained. He was part of this family's story, too. I thought it was right. For a second, the old knot of tension tried to rise in my chest. But then I stepped forward, extending my hand. John, I said, I owe you a thank you for being here when I wasn't, for stepping in when I failed. I can't change what I missed, but I can appreciate the fact that someone made sure they weren't alone. John shook my hand, his expression warm. They never stopped needing you, David. They just needed someone in the meantime. We sat down together, and for the first time, I didn't feel threatened by his presence. I felt grateful. Dinner was full of conversation and laughter, the kind that doesn't feel forced. Emily told a story about a class project. Mark teased me about my rusty cooking skills. Linda rolled her eyes at both of us. It felt like family again. The ripple effect didn't stop there. The following spring, Mark announced he was getting married. At the engagement party, he pulled me aside. Dad, he said, I've been thinking about what kind of husband I want to be, what kind of father I want to be someday, and I keep thinking about you, not the version from a few years ago, but the version now, the one who's here. I want to be like that. It wasn't just a compliment, it was a legacy. Emily, on the other hand, took my story in a different direction. She began incorporating it into a class she taught on social psychology. One day, she showed me her lecture notes. A slide titled "The Empty Chair," with a photo of our Thanksgiving table from the year my seat was missing. It's about presence, she explained, about how absence shapes relationships. I tell them that absence isn't just physical, it's emotional. And I tell them how someone can come back from that, if they're willing to do the work. Seeing my failures and redemption turned into a teaching point was humbling, but it also made me proud. My mistakes had become more than just regrets. They'd become lessons. Over the years, I realized something that had eluded me for most of my life. Success isn't the title on your business card or the balance in your account. Success is walking into a room and seeing people who are glad you're there. I stopped measuring my life in promotions and projects. I measured it in dinners, in phone calls, in birthdays I didn't miss, in ordinary Tuesdays that didn't need a reason to be special. That chair at the Thanksgiving table became a symbol in our home. Not of what I'd lost, but of what I'd fought to get back. One evening, years later, I sat on the porch with Linda, watching the lake shimmer in the fading light. She reached over, resting her hand on mine. You know, she said softly, I didn't think we'd ever get back here. I squeezed her hand. Neither did I, but I'm glad we did. I looked back at the house, where Mark's kids were running through the living room, and Emily was showing them how to play a few notes on the piano. That was my legacy. Not the bank, not the titles, not the deals. My legacy was right there, in that house, in those people. And I intended to be present for every moment of it.